Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Tonight, President Donald Trump will deliver his first State of the Union of his second term to a joint session of Congress. Members of the Supreme Court are also usually in the audience, and that will give President Trump an opportunity to speak to them directly, just days after the High Court decided to strike down a big part of the president's tariff policy.
The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing, and I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed, for not having the courage to do what's right for our country.
That was Trump reacting to the ruling on Friday. His response has evolved since then. Most recently, he's pledged sweeping global tariffs of 15% using other legal justifications. And as the fallout from the Supreme Court decision spreads, Bloomberg White House reporter Josh Wingrove tells me it's expected to dominate Trump's speech.
I think we're going to hear a lot about it. I think that's what I'll start with. I think he will talk, no doubt, about the investment pledges that have come in his term that he says are driving this golden age. Sort of the flip side of that is that some of those are tied to trade deals that now have a lot of uncertainty around them.
But of course, tariffs are not the only issue Trump is likely to address. Josh says there's a lot on Americans' minds.
Voters want right now action on prices, immigration in particular, after the killing of Alex Preddy and Renee Good in Minneapolis.
Josh says those are subjects Trump may steer away from.
Trump likes to tell habitually, he likes to tell positive stories, does not like to admit defeat, in any case. But there are warning signs flashing. Heading into the midterm cycle here, Trump himself is really anxious to hold the House because he thinks he's going to get impeached if they don't. And so that's why the stakes, I think, are pretty high for him personally and politically in this one.
I'm David Gura, and this is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. Today on the show, how President Trump is expected to use this State of the Union to rally his party, and what issues he's likely to address amid lower approval numbers and tensions in the U.S. and around the world. President Trump was workshopping his State of the Union last week in a speech he delivered at a steel plant in Rome, Georgia.
We had record inflation. You don't have it anymore. I'm going to make a State of the Union address on Tuesday. I hope you're going to watch. And we're going to be talking about it.
But Bloomberg's Josh Wingrove says the focus of the State of the Union changed after the Supreme Court struck down many of the tariffs President Trump had put in place.
Trump has been pressuring the court for months against this decision. And he's sort of been tweeting through it, as we all do, from time to time in the days since then, sort of riffing, saying, wow, the court actually gave me even more power than they intended. And other countries better not renege on their trade deals because of this, or I'll go even bigger. But it's been very chaotic. What that court ruling did was strike down really the key leg of the stool of Trump's tariff policy, the reciprocal tariffs on, basically every nation on earth, or at least many of them, as well as the fentanyl-related tariffs on China, Canada, and Mexico. And Trump is trying to sort of rebuild Humpty Dumpty through a different sort of series of authorities that, will take time, but it's been very ad hoc. It's been unclear. Over the weekend, he announced that he would increase a tariff from a level set not even 24 hours before, for instance. And so I think we will hear him riff and probably rage about this ruling, which he thinks really undercuts his authority. Of course, it is a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court that ruled 6-3 against his interpretation of that. So he's wrong in their eyes. But I think the question is, what is the fallout of this? The European Union, for instance, has moved to pause implementation of the trade deal as this tariff chaos swirls. If you're the Canadians and Mexicans waiting to renegotiate the USMCA trade deal, which is an actual trade deal on the books in law, this probably changes your calculus on it. If you are the Koreans and Japanese who are on the hook for hundreds of billions of dollars in financing and pledges, I think you are looking at this landscape wondering whether you should change tack a little bit or more than a little bit. So I think Trump's sort of entire philosophy, economic growth philosophy, is built on tariffs, both the sort of leverage he gets from them in negotiations and the domestic investment he believes that they drive. And so the court ruling is going to hang over all of this, so we will hear about it. Remember, Trump, of course, often goes heavily off script in speeches. And so that is the real X factor heading in to this evening, is how much will he deviate from the prepared text. You can almost always tell whether he's doing it or not. And I think when he goes off script, that's when we're going to hear a lot about the tariffs.
So that'll be a big part of this. I imagine foreign policy will be as well. And we have President Trump at this moment kind of deciding whether or not to attack Iran. What do we know at this point about what he's considering, what the president's weighing?
Trump has acknowledged that he's considering, a direct intervention beyond where they've been before. In other words, more than just sort of a one and done bombing run. But it's hard to take what they're saying at face value, because since the previous strike, which of course Trump insisted several different ways completely decimated the Iranian nuclear capability, of course there are questions about whether that was actually the case and whether Iran has the ability to sort of restart things in a more quick way than President Trump had stated after the last attack. Now, this is one of the really sort of ongoing tensions in the MAGA movement about whether foreign interventions like this are worth it. There is definitely an isolationist camp that does not want to get bogged down in foreign conflicts. And Trump, on the flip side, often sort of quick in and out type operations, as we of course saw with Iran, but we saw with Venezuela as well. Now, Trump likes to sort of leave the dagger hanging a little bit in these negotiations all the time. So it's difficult to read one way or another. But right now he's leaving a lot of options on the table, including the direct American military involvement in Iran.
So that dagger is hanging, as you say. And then you've got Steve Witkoff, the president's close advisor, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, pursuing this diplomatic track as well. Is it clear to you what the goals are on that track, what those two men are trying to find an agreement on, perhaps to forestall this military action?
I think Trump wants a deal of some kind. Beyond that, it's not clear to me what they're willing to barter, if anything, and what they're demanding, if anything. They've stopped short of calling for outright regime change, or at least Trump has. And by the way, that is a backdrop to the tariff discussion. It's a backdrop to foreign affairs. Trump thinks that he benefits from this chaos and from this opaque sort of will he or won't he uncertainty, that hangs over so much of his agenda.
This speech comes on the 4th anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and I'm curious what the White House has indicated the president might say about that. Of course, that's another diplomatic track that Steve Witkoff is on right now, trying to find some resolution to that conflict. Yeah,
Trump has been frustrated by the lack of a resolution there and occasionally sort of let slip that he seems frustrated with Putin himself. Of course, Putin continues to dangle the prospect, or at least to Trump dangle the prospect of some kind of deal, while continuing and even ramping up attacks both on the lines of battle in Ukraine, but also missile strikes on Ukrainian cities well behind those lines. And so I think right now, Trump has been distancing himself from that conflict and distancing his political sort of stake from whether there'll be a deal or won't be a deal. And that's a big question mark and concern for the Europeans broadly and Ukraine specifically, as to whether American arms shipments will continue, at what level, at what price, whether American pressure on Russia will continue, and with what fervor. And so if we hear mention of it, I don't think we're going to hear a fresh call. I've been wrong before, David. I expect to be wrong, maybe, but there's no sign that he's preparing a fresh push. He seems to, frankly, on the flip side, be tiring of the back and forth from it, not walking away entirely from trying to get a deal, but more and more disinterested, he seems, in the to and fro.
Coming up, how Trump is expected to address affordability, the latest economic data, and the midterm elections. Josh, going back to that speech the president gave in Rome, Georgia, he declared, "I've won affordability."
What word have you not heard over the last 2 weeks? Affordability. Because I've won affordability.
Is this the White House position now when it comes to that issue of cost of living, of affordability?
Yeah, so he's called affordability a hoax in the past, and what he means by that is he thinks Democrats are ginning it up as an issue beyond what voters feel. I think there's a lot of evidence that, the truth is different, and that voters continue to feel frustrated by not only ongoing price increases, but a lack of disinflation and a decrease in prices that Trump had sort of teased, in particular on things like energy costs. And so we will see him sort of take the wins. Gasoline prices, expect that to be discussed heavily throughout this evening's speech. But I think, he has been trying to diffuse the issue that he, of course, rode pretty heavily in the 2024 campaign of voter outrage over price levels. That continues to simmer. Poll after poll shows it. And so I think that he is trying to sort of argue his way out of the box a little bit on it. But I think we've just seen so much evidence that voters, including Republican voters, continue to be pretty upset about this. And it, of course, is difficult for the government to do much about it. It's been a bit of deja vu for the White House press corps watching Trump go after like the meatpacking conglomerates, for instance, because that is exactly what Joe Biden tried to do when he was in exactly the same position in his term and facing exactly the same voter pressure of people being upset about it. So I expect Trump to, of course, sweep a lot of that under the Biden rug, say this is a Biden problem, we're fixing it, and just kind of go forward and pray, basically, that the CPI prints continue to be not that bad or even good, dare I say, and that this will fade from voters' minds come November. But the politics hanging over this are funny because Trump is really pushing to cling to a majority because he thinks he'll get impeached if he doesn't. But he's not really using the majority he has right now for much, in part because it's so small, and in part because we're starting to see Republican blowback on things like tariffs. And so he's in a pickle.
Josh, let me ask you a bit more about how he's approaching these midterms. So we've seen Democrats win some seats in some key special elections in Texas and Louisiana. I imagine those losses are leading to some nervousness among Republicans. What do we know about how President Trump plans to support Republican candidates in these midterms, the kinds of candidates he's setting out to support?
He said he's going to travel, but he hasn't really followed through on it so much. And of course, there are some races where the party would love for him to get involved. Texas jumps to mind on that, where there's a pretty duke-it out primary going on for the Senate race there that could help determine whether that seat is more in play than it otherwise might be. And so, he continues to sort of demand purity tests of Republican candidates. And if he doesn't, get what he wants, such as votes on tariffs, he is very comfortable supporting a primary against a sitting lawmaker, even if it raises the chance that Democrats flip that seat. And so what is he going to do? Well, he thinks that he's going to sort of put himself on the ballot. That is what we've heard Susie Wiles and others signal publicly, that Trump getting involved will help make sure the Trump voters, who tend to only go to the polls for Trump, bother to in a midterm when he himself is not necessarily on the ballot. But Trump getting involved, of course, has a two-pronged effect, activating both his biggest supporters and those people that either don't like him or are tiring of him. And so whether this all works out, we'll see. But you can start to see some states lining up on the Senate side where things could get thorny in a hurry, and you can start seeing how Democrats are feeling pretty confident when they, just need a handful of seats to flip and they'll really take the majority in the House.
Josh, you've talked about economic policy and foreign policy. You said one goal here for the president is not to be impeached if he loses the majorities in the House and the Senate. Beyond that, what are the president's other priorities here at this point in his second term? I look at that Project 2025 document from the Heritage Foundation, what it's called for, and it seems like the president's done roughly half of what's in there. Do we have a good sense of what's next on his policy agenda?
I think the sense is fading because new battles are cropping up. I'm thinking here in particular of his recent criticism of Leonard Leo and the broad sort of Republican judicial establishment that has been so core to his confirmation of 3 Supreme Court justices. He made a comment in the last week or so that sort of acknowledged that he doesn't expect more of that, by the way, that neither Alito nor Thomas will retire in his term. It's difficult to continue enacting the agenda if the feuds within your movement are starting to rise, and Trump going to battle with like the hardcore conservative legal establishment. And it's not clear necessarily that he will fully do that, but that is sort of a warning sign that unity might be fading. Covering him, it does seem like the sort of pre-cooked meals that were stacked in the freezer for day one are pretty empty. Now they're sort of dealing with crises as they come up. So I think he will continue to try to do tariffs by executive action. He will continue to try to codify things without Congress. And we'll see him go abroad and try to strike deals, chiefly, of course, with that trip to China in April. where, you know, a lot of eyes will be on whether the Chinese and Americans will extend the current sort of rolling deal that they have right now, in particular because the Supreme Court just struck down a pretty big part of Trump's tariffs on China. And so, you know, he'll do what American presidents do when they are approaching lame duck status, which is use the tools you have. But the purity test stuff and what he does with the money is a big factor hanging over the entire Republican Party, in particular as they begin to move to the question of who will be our flag bearer in 2028 for the Republican Party.
This is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. I'm David Gura. To get more from The Big Take and unlimited access to all of Bloomberg.com, subscribe today at Bloomberg.com/podcast offer. If you like this episode, make sure to follow and review The Big Take wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps people find the show. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.